Let's begin with a question so foundational that it cuts straight to the core of human interaction. Why is it that we so often fail to truly understand each other? You've experienced this, haven't you? That moment where someone's words, intentions, or emotions seem entirely opaque, and no matter how hard you try, you find yourself grasping at straws, lost between what they're saying and what they're actually feeling. It's frustrating, isn't it? But here's the twist: the problem isn't them. It never was. The problem is how we listen, or more truthfully, how we don't. You see, we think we're listening to others, but most of the time we're not. What we're doing instead is projecting. We're projecting our assumptions, our values, our beliefs, and even our fears onto the other person. And when we do this, we don't hear them, we hear ourselves. This is the first great barrier to understanding. Socrates, ancient philosopher, understood this better than anyone. He realized that the key to understanding another person wasn't to impose your own perspective, but to strip away your assumptions entirely and meet them where they are. But how do we do that? How do we silence the relentless chatter of our own minds long enough to truly hear someone else? Here's where Socrates' secret comes in. His method wasn't about intellectual dominance or having the right answers. No, it was about asking the right questions. But not just any questions that reveal the underlying structure of someone's thoughts, their values, their fears, and their desires. The kind of questions that force a person to confront what they truly believe, even if they don't fully understand it themselves. This is the Socratic method, and it's not just a tool for philosophers or academics. It's the single greatest tool you can use to understand anyone instantly. But before we explore how to apply this in our lives, let's pause for a moment and examine why this works so profoundly. Think about it: how often do you feel truly understood? How often does someone see you not the mask you wear, not the persona you present to the world, but you in all your complexity and contradictions?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
It's rare, isn't it? And when it happens, it's almost overwhelming. That's because to be understood is to be seen, and to be seen is to be validated. And here's the catch: we all long for this, but we rarely offer it to others. Why? Because it requires us to step outside of ourselves. It requires us to set aside our ego. Now, let's be honest, the ego hates this. The ego thrives on being right, on being in control, on being the center of attention. It resists anything that threatens its dominance. And yet, understanding another person demands that we do exactly that. It demands that we put the ego aside and approach the other person with genuine curiosity and humility. This is the essence of Socrates' secret: true understanding begins not with answers but with questions, and not with dominance but with humility. So let's break this down into something practical, something you can use right now. The next time you're in a conversation, try this. Instead of responding to what the other person says, ask them why they believe it. Then, when they answer, ask them what that belief is based on. Keep going, not to corner them or prove them wrong, but to help them articulate something they might not even realize about themselves. What you'll find is that most people have never been asked these kinds of questions before. Most people have never been given the space to explore their own thoughts so deeply. And when you give them that space, something remarkable happens. They open up. They trust you. And in that moment, you understand them, not just their words, but their essence. But here's the deeper truth: this isn't just about understanding others. It's about understanding yourself. Because every time you ask someone a question, every time you peel back the layers of their thoughts and emotions, you're confronted with your own assumptions, your own biases, your own blind spots. And if you're willing to face those, if you're willing to question yourself as deeply as you question others, you'll discover something extraordinary. Most of what you think you know about yourself is an illusion. Let's pause here and ask something uncomfortable. How much of what you believe about yourself is actually true? How much of it is simply a story you've been telling yourself, a story you've never questioned? For example, you might believe that you're a good listener, but are you? Do you listen to understand, or do you listen to respond? Do you listen to connect, or do you listen to defend your own perspective? Be honest with yourself. Because if you're not, you'll never break free of the illusions that keep you from truly understanding others or yourself. Now let's take this a step further. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. But what does it mean to examine your life? It means questioning everything: your beliefs, your values, your desires, your fears. It means asking yourself not just what you believe, but why you believe it. And here's the hard part: it means being willing to let go of anything that doesn't hold up to scrutiny. This is the price of understanding, and it's not a small one. But the reward is immeasurable. Because when you strip away the illusions, when you see yourself and others as they truly are, you experience a clarity and a connection that is nothing short of transformational. Let's bring this back to the practical. In every interaction, there are two forces at play: the desire to be understood and the fear of being misunderstood. Most people live their lives trapped between these two forces, never fully expressing themselves, never fully connecting with others. But what if you could change that? What if you could create a space where people felt safe to be themselves, where they felt truly seen and heard? That's what Socrates' secret is really about. It's not just a trick to understand others, it's a way to transform your relationships and ultimately your life. But let's not stop here. Let's go deeper. Because understanding someone isn't just about what they say, it's about what they don't say. It's about the silences between their words, the emotions behind their expressions, the contradictions in their beliefs. To truly understand someone, you have to listen with your whole being, not just your ears, but your intuition, your empathy, your presence. And to do that, you have to be fully present. You have to let go of your own agenda, your own judgments, your own need to be right. This is the hardest part, but it's also the most important. Because the moment you let go of yourself is the moment you truly connect with someone else. So here's the challenge: can you do it? Can you set aside your ego long enough to truly understand another person? Can you ask the kind of questions that reveal their inner world without imposing your own? Can you listen not to respond, not to judge, but to understand? And most importantly, can you do the same for yourself? Because if you can, you'll discover something profound. The more deeply you understand others, the more deeply you understand yourself. And in that understanding, you'll find a connection that transcends words, a truth that goes beyond reason, a wisdom that changes everything. Let's stop here. Take a moment to reflect on this. And when you're ready, let's continue to explore what it means to truly understand someone and ourselves. If we are to continue this exploration into the art of understanding, we must now confront a reality that most people avoid: the fact that we are, by nature, poor observers of others. I don't mean this as an insult, but as a starting point for clarity. You see, when we look at someone, we think we're seeing them as they are. But in reality, we're seeing them as we are. Every interaction, every judgment, every interpretation we make of another person is filtered through the lens of our own experiences, beliefs, and biases. And here is the harsh truth: most of the time, we are unaware of these filters. Think about the last time you misunderstood someone, or perhaps the last time someone misunderstood you. What caused it? Was it a failure of words, or was it something deeper? Most misunderstandings don't arise because of what is said, but because of what is assumed. Assumptions are the silent architects of misunderstanding, and they are everywhere. We assume we know what others mean. We assume we understand their intentions. We assume their values are the same as ours. And yet, how often are those assumptions wrong? If you've ever been on the receiving end of a misunderstanding, you know exactly how painful and isolating it can feel. So why do we keep doing this to others? The answer lies in a fundamental human flaw, our tendency to believe that our perspective is the default perspective. We rarely stop to consider that the person across from us sees the world in an entirely different way. Their experiences, culture, upbringing, and even biology shape their view of reality in ways we can't fully comprehend. And yet, we act as though our reality is the only reality. This is the ego at work again, whispering to us that we are the center of the universe, that our way of seeing things is the correct way. But the moment we buy into this illusion, we lose the ability to understand others. So how do we break free from this trap? The answer, once again, lies in the wisdom of Socrates. His secret wasn't just about asking questions, it was about asking questions from a place of genuine ignorance. Socrates famously claimed to know nothing, and this wasn't false humility, it was a deliberate choice. By admitting his ignorance, he created space to truly listen and learn. And here's the paradox: the more he acknowledged his ignorance, the wiser he became. Why? Because he understood that knowledge begins where assumptions end. Now let's turn this into something practical. The next time you're in a conversation, try this: assume you know nothing. Assume that everything you think you understand about the other person is incomplete or even wrong. Approach them as though they are a mystery to be unraveled, not a problem to be solved. When they speak, don't just listen to their words, listen to the meaning behind their words. Pay attention to their tone, their body language, their pauses. Ask yourself, what are they really trying to say? What are they feeling? What do they need? But here's the hard part: resist the urge to fill in the gaps with your own assumptions. Resist the urge to interpret their words through the filter of your own experiences. Instead, ask them. If they say something you don't fully understand, don't pretend you do, ask them to clarify. If they express an emotion that seems contradictory, don't dismiss it, ask them to explain. And when you ask, don't ask to confirm your own beliefs, ask to discover theirs. This might sound simple, but it's not. Because to truly listen in this way, you have to let go of control. You have to let go of the need to be right, the need to fix, the need to impress. You have to be willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. And this is where most people fail. They mistake understanding for agreement, and they mistake listening for passivity. But true understanding requires neither agreement nor passivity, it requires presence. It requires you to show up fully, to engage deeply, and to stay open, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's take this idea further. Imagine someone you strongly disagree with. Maybe it's a family member, a colleague, or even a stranger online. What happens when you interact with them? Do you listen to understand, or do you listen to argue? Do you try to see things from their perspective, or do you try to convince them of yours? Be honest. Most of us approach disagreement with a closed mind, not an open one. And yet, what would happen if you approached it differently? What would happen if, instead of trying to win the argument, you tried to understand the person? Here's an exercise: the next time you find yourself in a disagreement, stop and ask yourself, what does this person believe? And why do they believe it? Then ask them, not in a confrontational way, but in a curious one. Say something like, I want to understand your perspective better. Can you tell me more about why you feel this way? And when they answer, don't interrupt. Don't argue, just listen. You might not agree with them, and that's okay. Understanding someone doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It simply means you see where they're coming from. And when you do that, something remarkable happens, the tension dissolves. The argument stops being about winning and becomes about connection. But let's not stop here. Let's go even deeper. Because understanding isn't just about what someone thinks, it's about who they are. And to understand who someone is, you have to go beyond their words. You have to look at their actions, their patterns, their contradictions. You have to ask yourself, what drives this person? What are they afraid of? What do they hope for? And most importantly, what pain are they carrying that they might not even be aware of? This last question is crucial because pain is the invisible thread that runs through every human life. It shapes our beliefs, our behaviors, our relationships. And yet, most of us are so focused on our own pain that we fail to see the pain in others. But if you want to truly understand someone, you have to look for their pain. You have to ask yourself, what wound are they protecting? What fear are they hiding? What need are they trying to fulfill? And when you see it, don't judge them for it. Don't try to fix it. Just acknowledge it. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply to see their pain and let them know they're not alone. But here's the catch: you can't do this for others if you're not willing to do it for yourself. You can't understand someone else's pain if you're unwilling to confront your own. And this is where the real work begins. Because most of us spend our lives running from our pain. We distract ourselves with work, with entertainment, with relationships, with anything that keeps us from facing the truth of our own suffering. But the more we run from it, the more it controls us. And the more it controls us, the less we're able to connect with others. So here's another challenge: can you face your own pain? Can you sit with it without judgment, without distraction? Can you ask yourself the same questions you ask others? What drives me? What am I afraid of? What am I hoping for? What wound am I protecting? If you can do this, if you can confront your own pain with honesty and compassion, you'll find that it no longer controls you. And when it no longer controls you, you'll be free to understand others in a way you never could before. Let's pause here again. Reflect on what we've discussed so far. Ask yourself how often you truly listen, how often you assume, how often you judge. And when you're ready, let's continue to explore the deeper layers of understanding, layers that go beyond the mind and into the heart. If we're to go even deeper into this question of understanding, we must take a hard look at something most of us avoid: the stories we live by. Every single one of us carries a story about who we are, what the world is, and how we fit into it. These stories define how we see ourselves and others. And yet, here's the unsettling truth: most of these stories are incomplete, if not outright false. They are fragments of experience stitched together by memory, shaped by culture, and reinforced by habit. But because we mistake them for truth, they become the lens through which we see the world, and in doing so, they distort our ability to truly see anyone else. Let me ask you something: when you meet someone, what's the first thing you notice about them? Is it their appearance, their tone of voice, their words? Whatever it is, your mind instantly starts constructing a story about them, doesn't it? You categorize them friendly or unfriendly, confident or insecure, intelligent or ignorant. And once that story takes hold, it becomes incredibly difficult to let go of it, even when new evidence contradicts it. Why? Because the mind craves certainty. It wants to simplify the complexity of human beings into neat, manageable categories. But in doing so, it reduces people to caricatures, missing the depth and nuance of who they truly are. Here's the problem: the stories we create about others often say more about us than they do about them. For example, if you see someone as arrogant, is it because they truly are, or because their confidence triggers your own insecurities? If you see someone as weak, is it because they lack strength, or because their vulnerability mirrors a part of yourself you've been taught to reject? The truth is, we project our own fears and desires onto others far more often than we realize. And until we become aware of these projections, we will never fully understand anyone, not even ourselves. This brings us to another layer of Socrates' secret. To understand someone else, you must first question the story you've created about them. And to do that, you must also question the story you've created about yourself, because the two are inseparable. The way you see others is a reflection of how you see yourself. If you believe you're unworthy of love, you'll see rejection in places where it doesn't exist. If you believe you're superior to others, you'll see inferiority in them, even when it's not there. And if you've never questioned these beliefs, they will act as invisible barriers, keeping you from truly connecting with anyone. So how do we break free from these stories? How do we see others and ourselves as we truly are, rather than as we imagine them to be? The answer lies in a radical kind of honesty. Not honesty in the sense of telling the truth to others, but in telling the truth to yourself. This kind of honesty requires you to confront the parts of yourself you'd rather avoid: your fears, your insecurities, your contradictions. It requires you to admit that you don't have all the answers, that you're not always right, that your perspective is limited and flawed. And most importantly, it requires you to let go of the need to define yourself or anyone else in rigid terms. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone you've struggled to understand, perhaps a friend, a partner, or even a stranger. Think about the story you've created about them. What assumptions have you made about who they are and why they act the way they do? Now ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if there's more to this person than I've been willing to see? What if the story I've created about them is just that, a story? And then ask them. Ask them about their experiences, their struggles, their dreams. But don't just ask to confirm your assumptions, ask to challenge them. Ask to discover a version of this person you've never seen before. But here's the catch: this kind of honesty is terrifying. It forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that you don't know as much as you think you do about others, about yourself, about the world. It forces you to admit that the ground you've been standing on might not be as solid as it seems. But this is also where real understanding begins, because the moment you let go of your need for certainty, you open yourself up to the infinite complexity and beauty of human beings as they truly are. Now let's turn to something even more uncomfortable: the ways we sabotage our own understanding. Have you ever noticed how often we avoid asking the hard questions? How often do we settle for surface-level conversations because digging deeper feels risky? We do this because understanding someone on a profound level requires vulnerability. It requires us to expose parts of ourselves we've kept hidden, to risk being rejected or misunderstood. And yet, without vulnerability, there can be no real connection. There can be no true understanding. Think about the last time you felt deeply connected to someone. What made that moment possible? Was it because you shared something vulnerable, something real, or was it because they did? That willingness to be seen, to let your guard down, is what creates the space for understanding. And yet we resist it. We hide behind walls of politeness, sarcasm, or intellectual detachment because it feels safer than showing what's really inside. But in doing so, we rob ourselves of the very thing we crave most: connection. So here's another challenge: can you be vulnerable? Can you show up in your relationships not as the version of yourself you think others want to see, but as you truly are? Can you create a space where others feel safe to do the same? This doesn't mean oversharing or spilling your deepest secrets to everyone you meet. It means being honest about your feelings, your fears, your uncertainties. It means asking the hard questions, even when you're afraid of the answers. And it means being willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, of not fixing, of simply being present with another person in their complexity. At this point, you might be wondering, why is this so hard? Why do we struggle so much to understand each other when it's something we all deeply desire? The answer, once again, lies in the ego. The ego doesn't want understanding, it wants control. It wants to be right, to be validated, to be admired. And understanding requires us to give all of that up. It requires us to surrender our need for control, to let go of our judgments, to step outside of ourselves. And the ego hates this. It resists it at every turn. But here's the secret: the more you let go of the ego, the freer you become. The freer you are to listen, to connect, to understand. So here's one final question for this part. What would happen if you let go of your ego entirely? What would happen if, just for a moment, you stop trying to control how others see you? Stop trying to prove yourself. Stop trying to be right. What would happen if you approached every conversation, every interaction, with the humility to admit that you don't have all the answers and the curiosity to discover something new? This isn't easy. It takes practice. It takes courage. But if you can do it, you'll find that understanding isn't just something you give to others, it's something you give to yourself. And in giving it, you'll find a depth of connection and clarity that changes everything. Take a moment to sit with this, and when you're ready, we'll move to the final part, where we'll explore the ultimate implications of Socrates' secret and how it can transform not just your relationships, but your entire life.